One Step Toward Divinity, Book 1 of the Divine Knight series, written and narrated by John Michael. Chapter 1. Alex swore at himself under his breath as he clutched his rusty dagger against his chest. He called himself every profane insult he knew, mostly targeting his own intelligence, or lack thereof in this case. He had sworn to himself that he would never get involved again. His presence and interference would only make things worse, reinforcing the reality that he was no longer a boy, but a 16-year-old cold-blooded criminal who needed to find something better to do with his evenings. Yet there Alex found himself in the middle of the early summer night, his back pressed against a thick tree, peeking around it at a campsite inhabited by several thieves, each armed with a short sword. The actions he considered were not his fault, he kept telling himself. It was all in his blood. Or maybe he was just flawed and needed to help everyone he saw. Maybe his greed was telling him he could get a reward for making the rescue. Maybe he was just crazy. Alex took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Maybe it was all true. Ultimately, none of the reasons mattered. He could continue to be angry at himself at a later time. Right now, on a crystal-clear night with the stars and moon shining down peacefully onto the forest clearing, and the sound of a storm echoing from several miles away, he was contemplating murder. Alex took stock of his targets. How many? How strong? How skilled? How would he survive? How could he survive? He counted. He thought he saw 10 thieves, though he may have counted a couple twice. There may have been others he couldn't see among the shadows of the trees. Facing down that many, the specifics didn't matter. He would unlikely have any sort of impact except, perhaps, to dull their blades on his bones. Alex shuddered. Even with the state of his life, he had no desire to die. Alex had the patience of a stalking lion, staying pinned to the tree as he watched the men. Thieves, Alex corrected himself. Best not to think of them as human at the moment. He absently tested the rough edge of his dagger. It would still hurt going into a body, and Alex knew where to strike to make a man quickly irrelevant in a fight, but the blade had lost most of its edge. If he could get his hands on one of those swords... It occurred to him suddenly that he could walk away. If he did, no one would blame him, no one would even know. There was absolutely no reason for him to be there. None. It wasn't his problem. After all, how long had he even been standing there? How much time had he already wasted? What time was it anyway? Alex wished he had a clock or a pocket watch, though he angrily reminded himself that it wouldn't be much good in the moonlight. Focus, Alex told himself. At the far end of the campsite, a young woman stood tied to a different tree. She was perhaps a year or two older, maybe 19, with tossed tawny hair and a wispy blue nightgown that barely clung to her thin frame. Even over the distance, the defiance in her eyes surprised and startled him. He withdrew his gaze and leaned against his own tree as he caught his rapid breath. He momentarily looked to the stars, then closed his eyes in pain as memories stung his consciousness. If it wasn't for her, if he could be anywhere else, if he could do anything else. Alex heard some commotion, so he looked around the tree once more. A tall, lanky man emerged from a tent near the girl. His relatively clean new leather clothes contrasted with the patched rags worn by the others. He also wore a wide-brimmed red hat with an outrageously large white plume that, for unexplainable reasons, immediately infuriated Alex. The newcomer looked dour, though he walked with an air of confidence, a master among slaves, or at least a captain among city guards. The others greeted him with some enthusiasm. "What did we get, Thomas?" one thief gleefully asked. Thomas smiled, but it was forced. Alex had honed his ability to detect subtle expressions on people, since for him that was often the difference between a fair trade or going unnecessarily hungry. "We could have done better," Thomas said, "but we did get several dozen tools and 300 silver." The others lightly groaned. 300, someone yelled. "That's barely enough for table scraps in Gavingston." Thomas sighed, then approached the campfire in the middle of the small clearing and gestured for the others to gather. Alex leaned a little farther out from his tree to listen, but remained in the darkness. Thomas stood tall, and his smile drooped a little, but he looked confident and determined. If nothing else, Alex thought, at least that much was genuine. "My friends," Thomas started, "I understand your concern. I will not lie, things are grim here. I don't have to tell you how unfair this country is to those like us. How many of us have begged for just a loaf of bread? How many of us have been denied promises made to us by the governors of the cities?" The other thieves murmured their agreement. Alex silently mouthed his, too. Thomas continued his impromptu speech. The islands are not kind to us. The governments and the rich want us to stay poor. How else can they feel important? How could they feel superior to us if we are equal? So they keep us down, they keep us hungry, and they keep us desperate. And yet they laugh and point when we beg, when we demean ourselves for their entertainment. They blame us for our misery, even though they are the ones who caused our suffering in the first place. Several of the thieves whistled, and one shouted his idea to kill everyone who possessed even the most meaningless amount of social power. Alex thought that went a little too far, but he still agreed with Thomas's sentiment. Alex, perhaps just as well or better than the others, understood that life. So we do what we need to survive, Thomas went on with grand gestures of his arms. What they won't share, we will take. If they won't feed us, we'll feed ourselves at their expense. We'll fight them to get what we deserve. There is shame in begging. There is shame in stealing. But none of this is our fault. Our methods of survival are only the results of what they've created. The thieves shouted their agreement and their loyalty to Thomas. Alex momentarily considered whether he ought to join them. Thomas walked to the restrained girl, though the others remained seated. And sometimes, he said as he leered at her, sometimes we deserve a little extra. And at that point, Thomas lost Alex's sympathy. There was no justification for what Thomas implied, no matter what bleakness infected him. Alex risked leaning even farther out from behind the tree to watch Thomas more closely. Thomas lightly caressed the girl's cheek. She jerked away from him as if his hand was coated in fire. Relax. You are merely a victim of circumstance, my dear. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal, she snapped. You stole from my parents. Isn't life bad enough without you making it worse? You just talked about how much the islands owe you, but what have you given the islands in return? The girl's simple statement stunned Alex. It appeared to have affected Thomas as well, though he quickly composed himself and found his confident, fake smile once again. We have tried to give all we can to the islands, Thomas mockingly argued. The world does not want us. The entire world, the girl shouted back, glaring directly into his eyes. Despite being bound to the tree, she looked the least helpless among them all in that moment. You have traveled the entire world looking for something that doesn't involve accosting a tiny shop in a tiny mining town on a tiny island? So this is truly your last hope? You are quite the world traveler, then. Alex blinked. Thomas paused once again, then took a deep breath in a losing effort to regain his composure. Your words don't matter. Nothing you say or do matters. You'll never understand us. Then help me understand, she replied earnestly. Alex was taken aback. Her plea had been honest, though he could not guess her motivation. Thomas turned his back on her and melodramatically shrugged. It would be a waste of my breath, he said. How could some sheltered harlot understand the troubles we've been through, right, gentlemen? The other thieves cheered and again pledged their loyalty to Thomas, but they were a little less confident about it. The girl ignored the insult, but defended herself anyway. Sheltered? Did you look around our village? Yetton is a poor town. My parents have the only shop, and we have to give almost everything we make to the king. I know things are bad, I do, but if you would only Enough! Thomas snapped. He walked over to the girl, grabbed her nightgown by the neckline with one hand, and drew a dagger with the other. This has been a stressful evening, girl. Like I said, I suggest you simply relax. Thomas sliced her nightgown down the middle to expose her cleavage and navel, but nothing else. Her protests fell mostly on deaf ears, but Alex could quite clearly hear her, and it ignited his rage. His arms shook, his fingers twitched, and the hairs on his arms and neck stood straighter. His vision became obscured by a subtle red color, as if someone had placed a thin silk cloth over his eyes. Alex tried to fight it off. He needed his mind to stay clear. He was surprised the situation was triggering his rage. He knew nothing about the girl, not her name, not her home, not her family, so why did he care about her that much? Another strong sense of rationality attacked his subconscious, pointing out the logic of the situation, that he was still facing about a dozen enemies who were all armed. Perhaps there was another way. I almost forgot to tell you, gentlemen, Thomas called as he released the girl. I know many of you have already dipped into our sister's barrels of ale, but I found a couple of her private stash, and those barrels are not filled with just any ale, but Griffin ale. The thieves stood and cheered, their voices strong in Thomas's favor once again. "Perhaps we should give our new sister a drink," Thomas declared as he took hold of the girl again. "Remember what they say, one drink past the lips will soon loosen the hips." Alex rolled his eyes as the thieves cheered again. That particular slogan appalled him, especially considering Thomas referred to the girl as their sister. Regardless, Alex did not have time to dwell on it as Thomas ripped the girl's nightgown open, bearing her to the world, or at least to the thieves, who were enraptured enough to stand in stunned silence for a beat before cheering once again. Even Alex's rationality grew angry. He sighed. The time had come. Waiting any longer would endanger her irreparably, her unwavering defiance be damned. Alex was her only chance, as uncomfortable as it made him. He did not want to get involved again. But he did want to sleep, and his unbounded shame would keep him awake if he did nothing regardless of the risk. He had to try to help her. It was the moral thing to do. Alex closed his eyes, cursed himself a few more times, then stopped resisting. Almost immediately, his eyes burst open. His vision barely tinted in red, and his heart beat faster. The hairs on his arm stood straight, and his muscles contracted like coiled springs. It was time. Alex charged into the camp without fanfare, stabbing the closest thief in the back before anyone realized he was there. However, despite their various states of intoxication, the thieves became instantly alert, jumping to their feet, drawing their weapons, and forming a barrier between Alex and Thomas. Alex snatched the fallen thief's sword, then considered the mass of humanity in front of him. He was unable to comprehend numbers. All he saw was a singular threat that wanted him dead. One thief decided to break off from his comrades and charge Alex. Showing absolutely no regard for proper technique, he approached Alex with his sword held entirely too high. Alex easily crouched under the thief's clumsy attack, slicing off his forward leg below the knee. As he fell forward, Alex jammed the point of his sword into the thief's back. The thief fell on his face unmoving. Alex stabbed him in the back of the neck, then grabbed his sword as well. Two more thieves ran forward, though they hesitated as Alex brandished both weapons. The hesitation cost the closest thief, as Alex smoothly ran him through the chest. The other attempted a strike to Alex's neck, but Alex parried it easily. He pulled the blade from the newest corpse and sliced across the thief's chest. The remaining thieves took a collective step backwards, so Alex became the aggressor. He charged forward, becoming a tornado of sharpened steel that stabbed, slashed, and amputated its way through the remaining resistance. Alex looked around for another target. All of Thomas's men lay dead, but Thomas himself was still standing wild-eyed. He had cut the girl away from the tree and held her tightly with a dagger against her throat. "One more step, jackass," Thomas growled. Alex paused. "That's right. Now, whatever you may think of me, I'm a businessman first. We can negotiate, especially because you just saved me my entire payroll. What do you want, the girl, the ale, the money? Whatever it is, I'll be happy to give it to you if you just let me walk away." Alex tightened his grip on his swords and struck a fighting stance. Pity. Thomas reversed the angle of the dagger to drive it into the girl's neck, but the girl had been waiting for it. Thomas had a firm grip on her body, but not her arms, and she blocked his attack by grasping his wrist. Thomas put more weight into his dagger arm, loosening his grip on the rest of her. She twisted away from him and drove her heel into his instep, then rather effortlessly pulled the dagger away from him. As the girl drove the dagger into Thomas's throat, Alex charged and ran one sword through his chest and the other through his stomach. The girl took a step back. Alex withdrew the blades, and Thomas fell to his knees. He tried to say something, gurgling his final words through the blood that filled his lungs, before falling dead. Alex breathed heavily, but was unaware of it. He looked at the girl, who was gasping and staring back in disbelief and confusion. Finally, she mouthed her thanks, collected the tattered remains of her nightgown, and bolted back through the forest. Alex shivered, and his vision returned to normal. His arms felt heavy, and his right arm went numb. He examined the blood that covered his clothing and skin, but the only blood of his own was a small trickle from his upper left arm. Apparently, he was going to live one more night. He felt the rest of his energy quickly waning, as it always did. A quick glance around the campsite revealed the carnage, with no movement from any of the intact bodies. The stench of internal organs and fluids, coupled with the thieves' already powerfully dirty aroma, traveled through Alex's nostrils and settled in his gut. He wanted to retch and rid himself of it, but his body had had enough, and simply decided to shut down. He managed to stumble behind a handful of bushes and shrubs to stay out of view of the campsite, then collapsed, unconscious, before he hit the ground. Alex had no idea what happened. He just knew he had to run. He ran behind the house, grabbed a shovel from the shed, and dug a hole he hoped would be deep enough. He tossed the bloody sword in, filled the hole, replaced the shovel, and vaulted over the fence. He just needed to run. He ran away from the city, choosing a direction at random, sprinting through the woods and across dirt roads. He crossed over the river, ignoring the mud on his boots and the illness contracted from the dirty water. Was he being followed? There was no time to check. He just needed to run. He found villages, but never stayed longer than he had to. Too many questions, too much curiosity. Farm villages were the best. Remote, lonely, unguarded. Plenty of hiding places and barns. He knew how to tread quietly, but right now he just needed to run. Another village. Where was he? What was the closest city? It didn't matter. He saw the boy playing with the dog. No one around. The boy had a dagger. He stole it. The dog attacked. He killed it. He had to. The boy would get over it. Alex just needed to run. It was a question of survival, and Alex was a survivor. Right now, survival meant running. He just needed to run. It was the same dream that always haunted him after his violent trances. Strangely, it hadn't reached its conclusion when he woke later in the night. At first, he thought he had slept a full day as usual, but something felt different. Had it only been a few hours? Maybe minutes? He felt a presence nearby. The sound of light breathing touched his ears, or perhaps it was an oddity in his surroundings. Alex's mind went on alert, but his body was still exhausted. He rose to his knees from behind the shrubs, looked around, and searched for a weapon he no longer had. Where was his sense coming from? Then he saw it. The campfire still burned, but between it and himself stood a human-shaped silhouette. He narrowed his eyes, trying to make out the shape. The silhouette seemed to know exactly where he was. It walked with confidence toward his hiding spot. Alex coiled himself, trying to get ready for a fight, but his body simply would not respond. The silhouette finally stopped about 10 feet from his position, though he could still not make out details. Alex gritted his teeth, waiting for death. "Are you Alexander Talos?" A human man's voice, probably a somewhat old man, though he wore a hooded robe that covered his face in shadows. Alex found no reason to lie. The man probably already knew the answer. "Yeah," he gasped, his voice failing him as much as his body. "Call me Alex." The man turned his back to Alex, then slowly considered the carnage. "Did you do all this?" "What?" "Did you single-handedly kill 14 thieves?" Alex attempted to stand from his crouch, but finally surrendered to his fatigue. He fell flat on his back and yawned, struggling to stay awake. "I guess so. I don't know how many I killed." "So you remember nothing when you get like that?" Alex felt the stranger eyeing him. "Get like what?" "Get like that. Vicious, demonic, bloodthirsty." "Yeah, I don't usually remember anything." "I confess my curiosity regarding why you get like that. I know how it started, but not why it happens." "Who are you?" Alex gasped. His physical discomfort was giving way to fear. How could the stranger know so much about his recent past? The stranger ignored Alex's question as he once again surveyed the campsite. "Is this what you want, Alex?" the man finally asked. "Are you happy with the paths you've chosen?" "Of course," Alex yawned. "I look forward to spending all my nights scrounging in the dirt like a rat before blacking out and killing random people. Isn't that everyone's dream?" "Do you know what a Holy Protector is?" Alex searched his memory, a struggle at the moment. "Isn't that the name of the horse that won at the Gavingston Fair?" The man walked over and knelt beside him. Alex still could not make out the man's features. "No, Alex. A Holy Protector is not an animal." After a struggle, Alex managed to sit up. "Then what is it?" "A Holy Protector is, for lack of a better descriptive, a hero." "A hero?" "Yes. You must be familiar with the old legends and church texts." Alex scoffed. "God and I try to stay out of each other's business." "Not this time. A Holy Protector is chosen to save villages, stop wars, and..." The man stood in motion to the campsite. "And resolve crimes. All tales are written with a grain of truth somewhere. Many that you are familiar with are derived from the efforts of Holy Protectors from generations ago." "You sound like a recruiter for one of the city guard brigades." "Not at all. Holy Protectors are above such petty things as mortal governments and boundary lines. kings bend their knees to the Protector. Alex found enough strength to rise to his feet. Listen, I'm not sure where I'm supposed to be, but I know it's not here. Goodbye and good luck finding a Protector guy. He turned his back on the stranger and started to limp away. Alex, you are turning down an opportunity that will never be offered to you again. Patrolling the streets for a handful of coins is not the kind of life I want to live. The stranger closed the distance, falling into step beside Alex. I'm not here on behalf of any mortal, as I said. I'm here for a greater cause, one that requires you to be above your fellow men. With that kind of power, you can have anything you could possibly want. Alex scoffed again and continued walking. Even if I believed in a god or some greater cause, which I don't need power, I just want to be left alone. You can have both solitude and power. Having power doesn't make you a slave to the people, just the opposite. Alex continued walking. Protectors may dine with governors, but the governors are the ones who serve the Protector. Alex stopped. The stranger did as well, waiting. Finally, Alex turned to him. Dine with governors? Protectors are above governments, the stranger repeated. If you want anything, they are there to give it to you, and that includes food, the best food on the islands. Alex narrowed his eyes and unconsciously cocked his head a fraction of an inch. The stranger drew himself up. We've been watching you, Alex. We do not choose protectors randomly. We watch your actions carefully to see what motivates you. We know you steal to eat every day, but I only steal what I need to, Alex snapped, continuing to walk away, not bothering to consider how the stranger could possibly know that. Do you think I'm like them? I only take what I need, and only from people who can afford to give it away. I have rules for myself. And that is why you would be a good protector. You know the difference between right and wrong, but more importantly, you know the world is not defined by two extremes. Protectors are above the law, so they are free to execute their missions however they need to. They are trusted to always act for the greater good, or at least survival, and you always do. Look, Jeffrey Clark. Jeff, I don't see what killing a bunch of thieves in the forest has to do with me knowing anything about the greater good. It's Jeffrey, the man grumbled. While your actions tonight don't prove the specifics of your moral compass by themselves, they do prove you have a conscience. They also show your bravery and your willingness to sacrifice yourself for others. As I said, we've been watching you for a long time. We know perhaps even better than you do that this is your true personality. Alex had no reply, but dismissed Jeffrey's words outright. Listen, the decision to become a protector can lead to the life you desire. Look at this. The stranger produced a small pouch, then took Alex's hand and dumped its contents into his palm. That's just what I was given to help you get started. Alex's eyes went wide. Even in the darkness, his fingers were able to discern the difference in shapes among the coins. He was holding more gold than he had ever seen before, assuming it wasn't counterfeit. Why would you just give me this? I'm not yet. You need to become a protector first. Then you'll have more treasures and riches coming your way. If all you desire is peace and solitude, being a protector and serving the world will enable you to gather the resources to find it. Jeffrey extended his hand expectantly. Alex looked from the coins to Jeffrey's hand. His logic and conscience were again at odds, but he finally returned the coins. Why do I feel like I'm making a deal with a demon? Because you were smart enough to see that when offers are too good to be true, they usually are. But in this case, I'm telling you the truth, and one day you'll realize the irony of your question. Alex considered the situation. There may have been enough money to hide for the rest of his life or even buy his freedom. What if Jeffrey was telling the truth? Alex had always felt something was missing in his life, even before he had become a fugitive. Was this it? Not that Alex had even the slightest belief in the heavens, but ignoring that, could he somehow use this to get his life back on his desired legal course? What if Jeffrey, if that was his real name, was just trying to recruit Alex for some other darker purpose? Well, he had confidence he could deal with that situation if he needed to. The man seemed old, moved a little stiffly, and didn't appear to be armed. Alex could handle anything. Probably. Besides, Alex had nothing better going on in his life. Fine, Alex said. I'm a Holy Protector. That was a rather sudden change. Are you sure? Yes. Jeffrey tipped his gaze to the stars. I'm not sure heaven heard you. Really? Alex sighed and rolled his eyes. Finally, he looked straight up and screamed, I'm a Holy Protector! And suddenly, Alex was struck with a bizarre sensation. It was as if his heart fluttered and sent a tiny wave of warmth throughout his entire body, resounding off his muscles and bones. It was relaxing and immensely powerful. He felt as if he could run around the perimeter of the island. Excellent, Jeffrey said as he clasped Alex on the shoulder. I'm proud that you have chosen this path. Great, but what was that weird... Now, even though the governors and other nobles bow to you, you still have to work with them. You just can't start protecting the world when you don't know how. Okay, but so get some sleep, because we have a big day tomorrow. You'll get your first assignment, and you'll probably get a hero's welcome in Yetton. We'll talk about your duties in the morning after we visit King Samuel. Duties? Yes, duties. Everything has its rules, you know. Have a good night, Protector. Alex was unsure, but he thought he saw Jeffrey shimmer for a moment before disappearing. Or maybe it was just his eyes playing tricks on him. His vision had started to go blurry again. Fatigue swept over him, draining his energy as it had after the fight with Thomas. He had absolutely nothing left to give, so he sunk to the ground and promptly fell asleep.